I woke up before the alarm, which almost never happened. Something felt wrong even before I opened my eyes. The air in the room felt colder than usual, and there was this strange, almost weightless sensation around my head, like something was missing. At first, I thought it was just nerves. My son's wedding day. Big emotions, restless sleep. That made sense. But then I lifted my hand and touched my hair, or at least I expected to. Instead, my fingers met skin. Not soft hair, not even short strands, just bare scalp. I froze. For a moment, I didn't breathe. I didn't move. My brain refused to process what my body already knew. Slowly, like I was afraid of confirming it, I ran my hand over my head again. Rough patches, uneven stubble, some longer pieces, jagged, like they'd been hacked away without care. No. The words slipped out quietly, barely a sound. I jumped out of bed and rushed to the mirror. And there she was, a stranger staring back at me. My reflection looked fragile, exposed, almost humiliated. My silver hair, the one thing I had always taken quiet pride in, was gone. Not styled, not trimmed. Destroyed. Someone had done this. Not an accident. Not illness. Not stress. This was deliberate. And I knew exactly who. Lena, I whispered, my voice shaking. My daughter-in-law. Even thinking it felt unreal, but deep down I already knew. There was something about the way she looked at me lately. The subtle comments. The smiles that never quite reached her eyes. Still, this was something else. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone. I didn't think. I just called. Daniel, I said the second he answered. Mom? It's barely 6. Is everything okay? No, I said. You need to come here. Now. There was a pause. I could already hear the irritation creeping into his voice. What happened? She did this, I said, my voice breaking despite my effort to stay calm. Your wife. She came into my house and cut my hair while I was sleeping. Silence. Then a soft exhale. Mom, that doesn't make sense. I closed my eyes. It doesn't have to make sense. Just come here. An hour later, he arrived. And of course, she came with him. Lena walked into my house like she belonged there. Perfectly dressed. Perfectly styled. Not a single hair out of place. Her long dark hair fell neatly over her shoulders, shining in the morning light like it was part of a commercial. Oh my God, Amelia, she said, covering her mouth. What happened to you? The performance was flawless. If I didn't know better, I might have believed her. You know exactly what happened, I said. Her eyes widened, just enough. I'm sorry. I looked at my son. She did this. Daniel rubbed his forehead like he already regretted coming. Mom, Lena was with me all night. We were at the hotel. Remember? After the rehearsal dinner? She could have come here after you fell asleep. Why would she do that? He asked. That question. That tone. That quiet disbelief. I turned back to Lena. Because you didn't want me to outshine your mother today. There it was. For a split second, just a split second, something flickered in her expression. Then it vanished. That's horrible, she said softly. Amelia, how could you even think something like that? I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. Last week, I said, you told me your mother was worried about the photos. That she didn't want to look older than the groom's side. I was making conversation. Lena replied smoothly. No, I said. You were measuring me. Daniel stepped in, his patience clearly gone. This is getting out of hand. Out of hand. I turned to him. Look at me, Daniel. He glanced, then looked away. That hurt more than anything else. Maybe you should see someone, he muttered. Hair loss can happen from stress. It didn't fall out, I said sharply. It was cut. You're being paranoid. That word landed like a slap. Paranoid. Embarrassing. In that moment, I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit for a long time. I had already lost my son. He just hadn't told me yet. Lena stepped closer to him, placing her hand gently on his arm. Maybe we should delay the ceremony, she said softly. Give Amelia time to rest. No, I said immediately. You don't get to do that. She tilted her head slightly. Do what? Pretend this is concern. Daniel sighed. Mom, please. Don't make today about you. And there it was. Clear. Simple. Final. Not about me. Nothing had been about me for a long time. I just need something to cover my head, I said quietly. Oh, Lena brightened. There's a small shop downtown. Very affordable. Affordable. The word dripped with meaning. I nodded slowly. Of course. They left soon after. Daniel paused at the door. Please don't cause a scene today, he said. Then he was gone. I stood there alone, in my own house, staring at the empty space where they had been. The silence felt heavy, almost suffocating. Then I sat down, and I cried. Not softly, not quietly, but the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep, a place that's been collecting pain for years without release. Because this wasn't just about my hair. It never was. It was about every small comment, every ignored call, every moment I chose silence to keep peace. And now this. By the time I left for the wedding, I was wearing a wig that didn't quite fit and a smile that felt even less real. But somewhere underneath all that, something had started to change. Something quiet. Something dangerous. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't just hurt. I was angry. The wig itched the moment I stepped out of the car. Not just a mild discomfort, but a constant раздражающее ощущение, like something чужое had settled onto my skin and refused to belong there. I adjusted it for the third time before even reaching the entrance, trying to make it look natural, trying to convince myself that no one would notice. But deep down, I knew they would. Maybe not immediately, maybe not openly, but people always notice what doesn't quite fit. The venue was breathtaking. Of course it was. Lena had spent months making sure everything looked like it came out of a luxury magazine. White roses, crystal chandeliers, soft music floating through the air. It was elegant, expensive, flawless. Everything I was not allowed to be today. I stepped inside quietly, hoping to blend into the background, but the moment I entered, I felt eyes on me. Not curious eyes, evaluating ones. The kind that scan you quickly and decide your worth in seconds. I found my seat without asking anyone for help. Third row. Not the first, where the groom's mother should sit. Not even the second. Third. Behind people who barely knew my son. I didn't ask about it. I didn't question it. I simply sat down, folded my hands in my lap, and told myself it didn't matter. But it did. Of course it did. Across the aisle, Lena's mother, Victoria, sat in the front row like a queen on display. Perfect posture, perfect outfit, perfect hair. Everything about her radiated control and pride. People leaned toward her, smiling, whispering, admiring. She belonged here. I did not. Beautiful ceremony, isn't it? A woman next to me whispered. Yes, I replied, smiling politely. That's what I had learned to do over the past few years. Smile. Agree. Stay quiet. Don't create tension. Don't make anyone uncomfortable. Especially not Lena. Especially not Daniel. The music shifted, and everyone turned. My son stood at the altar, straight-backed, confident, handsome. For a moment, my chest tightened. I remembered a different version of him, a little boy holding my hand too tightly on his first day of school, afraid to let go. A boy who used to run into my arms after every small victory, every scraped knee, every nightmare. Back then, I was his safe place, his entire world. Now I was an obligation. Lena appeared at the end of the aisle, and the room seemed to hold its breath. She looked stunning. Of course she did. Everything about her was carefully designed to impress. Her dress, her expression, the way she moved, it was all perfectly calculated. Daniel looked at her like she was everything. And maybe she was. Maybe that's how life works. You replace one center with another. You move forward. You let go. But no one tells you how it feels to be the one left behind. The ceremony passed in a blur. Vows were exchanged. Promises were made. Applause filled the room. I clapped too, of course. I smiled. I played my role. But inside, something felt hollow, like I was watching someone else's life instead of living my own. When it was over, people rushed forward to congratulate the couple. I stayed back. No one noticed. At the reception, it became even clearer where I stood. My table was near the back, close to the service door. Not hidden completely, just enough to be out of focus. I sat with distant relatives and acquaintances, people who remembered me vaguely, but didn't really know me. They were kind, at least. One of them, an older man named Harold, told me he remembered Daniel as a child. You were always there for him, he said. School events, sports, everything. That kind of dedication, it's rare. I nodded. Yes, I said. That was a long time ago. But his words stayed with me, because they were true. I had been there. Always. No matter how tired I was. No matter how hard life got. After my husband died, it was just the two of us. I worked more jobs than I can even remember now, mornings, nights, weekends. Anything to make sure Daniel had opportunities one never did. And I never complained. Not once. Because that's what love looked like to me. Apparently, I had misunderstood. When the speeches began, I listened carefully. I don't know why. Maybe I still hope for something. Daniel stood up, confident and composed, and began thanking everyone who had supported him. He thanked Lena. He thanked her parents. He praised Victoria's wisdom, her kindness, her guidance. He talked about how welcomed he felt in their family. Then he sat down. That was it. No mention of me. Not even a sentence. The room filled with applause again, but I couldn't hear it properly. Everything sounded distant, like I was underwater. I stared at the tablecloth, at the neatly folded napkin in front of me, trying to keep my expression neutral, trying not to let it show. But something inside me cracked. I excused myself quietly and went to the restroom. The fluorescent lights were harsh, unforgiving. I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself. The wig looked even worse up close. Artificial, obvious, like a cheap disguise. I reached up and adjusted it again, but it didn't help. Nothing could fix this. For a moment, I just stood there staring. And then I saw it. Not the wig. Not the tired eyes. Not the woman who had spent years trying to be invisible. Something else. Anger. Not loud. Not explosive. Cold. Clear. Focused. It settled into me slowly, like something waking up after a long sleep. I had spent years shrinking myself, making space for others, accepting less than I deserved because I thought that's what love required. But standing there, in that harsh light, I realized something simple and brutal. No one was going to give me my place. I had to take it. I returned to the reception, but I wasn't the same person who had walked out. I didn't rush back to my table. I didn't try to blend in. I simply observed, and what I saw changed everything. Near the center of the room, Lena stood surrounded by guests, laughing, glowing, performing. Her voice carried easily over the noise. "You should have seen this morning," she said, smiling brightly. "Amelia actually thought I cut her hair while she was sleeping." Laughter. Soft at first, then louder. "Oh no," someone said. "She really said that?" Lena nodded, lowering her voice slightly in a way that somehow made people lean closer. "I think she's just having a hard time adjusting," she added gently. "It's been difficult."
Victoria sighed dramatically.
"Some people don't age gracefully," she said. More laughter. I stood there, just out of their circle, listening as my reality was rewritten in real time. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't even a person. I was a story, a joke, a problem. And the worst part? People believed it. Because it was easier. Because it was more comfortable to see me as unstable than to question her. I could have walked away. I could have stayed silent. That's what I had always done. But something inside me refused this time. I stepped forward. The laughter faded as they noticed me. Faces shifted, amusement turning into awkward politeness. "There she is," Lena said smoothly. "Amelia, we were just talking about you." "I heard," I replied. My voice was calm, too calm. For the first time that day, she looked uncertain. "Are you feeling better?" someone asked me gently, in that careful tone people use when they think you might break. "I feel perfectly fine," I said. And for the first time, I meant it, because clarity is a powerful thing. And in that moment, I understood exactly what was happening, exactly who they were, and exactly what I needed to do next. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at Lena and smiled, not politely, not weakly, but in a way that made her pause, because she felt it too. The shift. She thought she had taken something from me that morning, but she was wrong. She had given me something instead. A reason. I left the reception earlier than anyone noticed. That was the strange part. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going, and no one seemed to care that the mother of the groom quietly disappeared before the night was over. It almost felt fitting, like the final confirmation of everything I had already begun to understand. I walked through the parking lot with steady steps, the cool evening air brushing against my face, and for the first time that day, the wig didn't bother me as much. Maybe because the discomfort inside me had finally found direction. The drive home was silent. No music, no radio, no distractions. Just my thoughts, clearer than they had been in years. I replayed everything. The morning, the accusations, Daniel's voice, Lena's performance, the laughter at the reception. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, I felt organized, like pieces of a puzzle finally snapping into place. For so long, I had tried to explain away small things, to justify behavior that didn't sit right with me. I told myself relationships were complicated, that adjustment took time, that love required patience. But now I saw it differently. It wasn't complicated. It was simple. I had been slowly pushed out of my own life, and I had allowed it. When I got home, the house felt different. Not empty, just quiet in a way that wasn't painful. I walked through each room slowly, noticing details I hadn't paid attention to in years. The kitchen table where Daniel used to do his homework. The chair where I would fall asleep after double shifts. The small marks on the wall from when he was learning to ride a bike inside during a rainy week. This house held my entire life. Every sacrifice. Every memory. Every version of me that had existed before today. I sat down in the living room and took a deep breath. Then I made a decision. Not emotional. Not impulsive. Final. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I couldn't sleep, but because I didn't want to. There was something almost unfamiliar about the energy I felt, a quiet determination that replaced the heaviness I had carried for years. I made coffee, sat by the window, and instead of thinking about what had been done to me, I started thinking about what I was going to do next. The first call I made was to a lawyer. "Good morning, this is Mr. Bennett's office." "Yes," I said calmly. I'd like to schedule an appointment. As soon as possible. There was a brief pause. Of course. What is this regarding? I need to update my will. Saying it out loud felt strange. Not because I hadn't thought about it before. I had many times, but because now it wasn't just a thought. It was action. By the afternoon, I was sitting across from him in a quiet office that smelled faintly of leather and paper. Mr. Bennet was older, composed, the kind of man who didn't react quickly to anything. I appreciated that. "What changes would you like to make, Amelia?" he asked. I placed a folder on the desk. Inside were documents I had prepared the night before. Not rushed, not chaotic, clear and deliberate. "I want to remove my son as the primary beneficiary." He didn't interrupt. He simply nodded and waited. "And instead," he asked. "I want to create a fund," I said, "for women who had to raise children alone. Education, support, opportunities. Something that actually builds a future." He leaned back slightly, studying me more carefully now. "That's a significant decision," he said. "Are you certain?" "Yes."
No hesitación.
No doubt. Because for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't making a decision based on guilt or expectation. I was making it based on truth. We spent the next hour going through details. Legal language, structures, conditions. It was almost mechanical, but underneath it, I felt something shift again. Control. Not over others, but over my own life. When I left the office, I didn't feel lighter. I felt stronger. The second decision came easier. I called a real estate agent. "I'm thinking about selling my house," I said. There was surprise on the other end, of course. There always is when someone makes a decision that doesn't fit the story people have about them. "Are you downsizing?" she asked. "No," I said. "I'm leaving." "Leaving where?" "Somewhere new." I didn't give details. Not because I didn't have them, but because they weren't necessary yet. This wasn't about explaining myself. It was about moving forward. Over the next few days, I worked quietly. I sorted through years of belongings, deciding what mattered and what didn't. It was harder than I expected, not because of the objects themselves, but because of what they represented. Every item carried a memory, and every memory carried a version of me I had once been. But I didn't hold on to everything. I couldn't. If I was going to move forward, I had to let go, not just physically, but emotionally. Some things I packed carefully. Photo albums, letters, a few pieces of jewelry. Not because they were valuable, but because they meant something real. Other things I gave away. Furniture, decorations, things I had once thought defined my home. They didn't anymore. Because the truth was, my home was never the house. It was the life I had built inside it. And that life had already changed. Daniel called a week later. "Mom, I heard you're selling the house," he said, his voice tight with confusion. "Yes," I replied. "Why didn't you tell me?" I paused for a moment. Because I didn't need to. Silence. "Amelia, this is serious," he said. "You can't just make decisions like this without talking to me." "I can," I said calmly. "And I did." "That's not what I mean." "I know," I replied. Another pause. Longer this time. "Are you okay?" he asked finally. It was almost ironic. "Yes," I said. "I am." And that was the truth. Not the version of okay I used to give, the one meant to reassure others, but a real one, because I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for approval, not for understanding, not for someone to finally see me the way I deserved to be seen. I already saw it, and that changed everything. That night, I stood in my bedroom, looking at my reflection again. My hair was still uneven, still growing back in awkward patches. The wig sat on the dresser, untouched. For a moment, I considered putting it on. Then I didn't. I walked past the mirror as I was.
No disguise. No adjustment.
No need to hide. Because the woman looking back at me wasn't someone to feel sorry for anymore. She was someone who had finally made a choice. And there was no going back from that. The first sign that something had shifted didn't come from Daniel. It came from silence. Not the peaceful kind I had started to enjoy, but a different one, the kind that follows when people suddenly realize they might be losing control over a situation they thought they understood. A week passed after his call, and he didn't reach out again. That alone told me everything. He wasn't used to me not explaining myself, not softening things, not making it easier for him to ignore what was really happening. For years, I had filled in the gaps, smoothed over tension, translated my pain into something manageable for him. Now there was nothing, just space, and he didn't know what to do with it. By the second week, the house was almost unrecognizable. Rooms that once felt full of history now looked stripped down, neutral, like a place waiting for someone new. Boxes were stacked neatly along the walls, labeled with a precision that surprised even me. I had always been organized when life demanded it, but this was different. This wasn't survival. This was intention. Every object I kept had a reason. Every object I let go of had a purpose. I wasn't clinging anymore. I was choosing. The real estate listing went live on a Tuesday morning. By noon, I had already received multiple inquiries. The agent called me, slightly breathless with excitement, talking about market demand, timing, pricing strategy. I listened, responded when necessary, but my mind was somewhere else. Not in the past. Not even fully in the present. It was already ahead, somewhere I hadn't quite reached yet but could clearly see. A different life. One where I wasn't defined by who needed me, but by who I chose to be. That same afternoon, Daniel showed up. He didn't call first this time. I heard the key in the door, the same one I had given him years ago, back when it meant trust and closeness instead of habit and entitlement. The door opened quickly, footsteps echoing louder than usual in the half-empty space. "Mom," he called out. I stepped into the hallway. "I'm here." He stopped when he saw the boxes. Not just noticed them, really saw them. His expression shifted from irritation to something closer to alarm. "What is all this?" "My things," I said calmly. "This isn't just packing," he replied, walking further inside, turning slowly as if the room itself might explain what I wasn't saying. "This is everything." "Yes." He ran a hand through his hair, something he always did when he was trying to make sense of something that didn't fit his expectations. "You're actually doing it," he said quietly. "You're really leaving." "I told you I was." "I thought you meant later. Or, I don't know. Not like this." I watched him carefully. There was confusion in his eyes, but underneath it, something else, something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. Maybe even fear. Not for me. For himself. For the situation slipping out of his control. "Where are you going?" he asked. "I have a place arranged." "With who?" "That's not important." "It is important," he insisted, his voice rising slightly. "You're my mother." I let that sit between us for a moment. "Yes," I said. "I am." The simplicity of the answer seemed to unsettle him more than any argument would have. Before he could respond, I heard another set of footsteps. Of course. Lena. She walked in more slowly than Daniel had, her eyes scanning the room, taking everything in with careful calculation. Unlike him, she didn't look surprised. She looked attentive, like she was analyzing a situation that had developed faster than she expected. "Amelia," she said softly, "we were worried." I almost smiled. Worried. That word again. "I'm sure you were," I replied. Daniel turned to her. "She's selling the house," he said, like he still needed confirmation. Lena nodded slightly, her gaze never leaving me. "I heard," she said. "But I didn't think it would happen so quickly." There it was. Not concern. Assessment. You should have talked to us, Daniel said again, more firmly this time. We could have helped you figure things out. I already did, I replied. That's not the same thing. No, I said. It's not. The silence that followed was different from before. Not empty, tense. Like something fragile had been placed in the middle of the room, and no one was sure who was going to break it first. Lena stepped forward. Amelia, she began, her tone gentle, controlled. We understand that the wedding was emotional for you. A lot happened. Maybe things were misunderstood. Nothing was misunderstood, I said. She stopped, just for a second, then recovered. I think, she continued carefully, that sometimes when people feel overwhelmed, they make decisions that might not be in their best interest long term. I looked at her, really looked. For the first time, I didn't see someone intimidating. I didn't see someone I needed to tolerate or adjust to. I saw exactly what she was. You mean decisions you don't benefit from, I said quietly. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. That's not fair, he said. It's accurate. Lena's expression tightened slightly, but she kept her composure. No one is trying to control you, she said. We just want what's best. For who? I asked. Neither of them answered immediately. That was answer enough. Daniel exhaled sharply. This isn't like you, he said. You're acting different. Yes, I said. I am. Why? The question hung in the air, heavier than anything else he had said so far.
Why?
For years, I would have explained, softened it, turned it into something easier for him to accept. But not anymore. Because I finally understood something, I said. And what is that? He asked. That waiting for someone else to treat you better doesn't work. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't. Lena crossed her arms, the first visible crack in her controlled posture. This is exactly what I was talking about, she said. This kind of thinking, I interrupted, is the reason I'm leaving. Silence. Sharp. Immediate. Daniel looked between us, tension building in his expression. No one asked you to leave, he said. No, I agreed. You just made it very clear I didn't belong. That's not true. Then tell me, I said calmly, when was the last time you chose me without being reminded? He opened his mouth, closed it, looked away. That was all I needed. Lena stepped in again, faster this time. You're twisting things, she said. You're making yourself the victim.
No, iraplia.
I was the victim. Now, I'm the one making a decision. Her composure slipped then. Not completely, but enough. You're being dramatic, she said. And you're being honest, I replied. Finally. The words landed harder than I expected. Even Daniel reacted to that, his expression tightening as if something inside him had shifted slightly, just enough to make him uncomfortable. Mom, he started, but I shook my head. No, I said gently. It's okay. And for the first time it really was, because this wasn't a fight anymore. This was clarity. And clarity doesn't need to shout. It just stands. I'm leaving next week, I said. Everything is already arranged. Daniel looked like he wanted to argue, to fix something, to pull the situation back into something familiar. But he didn't. Because he couldn't. Lena didn't speak again. She just watched me. And this time, there was no performance. Just understanding. Because she saw it too. She hadn't lost control completely. But she had lost me. And that changed the entire game. The last week in the house passed faster than I expected, but not in a rushed or chaotic way. It was quiet, steady, almost deliberate, like each day understood its role in closing something that had lasted a lifetime. By then, there were no more arguments, no more unexpected visits, no more attempts to fix anything. Daniel didn't come back after that conversation, and Lena certainly didn't. At first, I wondered if he would call again, if there would be one more conversation, one more attempt to pull me back into the version of life they were comfortable with. But the call never came, and surprisingly, I didn't miss it. I spent those final days not looking back, but organizing forward. That was the difference. Before, I would have walked through each room drowning in nostalgia, replaying every memory like it might somehow keep me anchored. But now I was selective. I allowed myself to remember, but I didn't allow those memories to hold me hostage. The kitchen where I had cooked thousands of meals wasn't just a place of sacrifice, it was proof of resilience. The living room wasn't just where I had waited for Daniel to come home late at night, it was where I had survived years of uncertainty on my own. Everything I saw, I reframed, not as something I was losing, but as something I had already carried through and outgrown. The day the house officially sold, I stood in the doorway one last time. There was no dramatic moment.
No tears. No hesitation.
I simply looked around, nodded to myself, and stepped outside. That was it. A chapter closed not with emotion, but with certainty. The flight to my new city felt different than any trip I had taken before. Usually, I traveled for someone else, visits, obligations, expectations. This time, there was no one waiting for me at the other end with a defined role for me to play.
No script.
No pressure. Just space. And that space felt unfamiliar at first. Not uncomfortable, just wide. Like stepping into a room without walls. When I arrived, the air felt different. Fresher. Quieter. Slower in a way I hadn't realized I needed. The apartment I had rented was modest but bright, with large windows that let in soft afternoon light. No heavy furniture, no clutter, no history attached to it.
Just a clean start.
I placed my suitcase on the floor, looked around, and for a brief moment, I felt something close to uncertainty. Not fear, but the awareness that this was entirely mine now. No one to blame. No one to lean on. No one to adjust for. Just me. And then, slowly, that feeling turned into something else. Freedom. The first few days were simple. I unpacked only what I needed. I walked through the neighborhood, learning the streets, the small details, where the best coffee was, which park felt the quietest, which places made me feel comfortable without explanation. I didn't rush to build a life. I let it form naturally, piece by piece. I met people gradually, not through obligation or shared history, but through presence. A neighbor who smiled and invited me for tea. A small book group that met once a week in a quiet cafe. A walking trail where I started going every morning, not for exercise, but for clarity. No one there knew my past. No one saw me as Daniel's mother or someone's responsibility. I was simply Amelia, and that alone changed everything. Weeks passed, and I began to notice something subtle but powerful. My thoughts were different, lighter, but also sharper. I wasn't constantly replaying conversations or anticipating someone else's reaction. I wasn't measuring my words or adjusting my behavior to avoid conflict. I spoke when I wanted to. I stayed silent when I chose to. And both felt equally valid. One morning, while sitting by the window with a cup of coffee, I caught my reflection in the glass. My hair had started to grow back, uneven still but natural.
Real.
I reached up and touched it, running my fingers through the short strands without hesitation. There was no embarrassment anymore. No need to hide it. It was part of me now, just like everything else I had gone through. And then the letter arrived. It came without warning, forwarded from my old address. I recognized Daniel's handwriting immediately. For a moment, I just looked at it, not opening it right away. 6 months ago, I would have rushed to read it, desperate for any sign of connection, approval, reconciliation.
But now,
I took my time. I made tea. I sat down. I let the moment settle. Then I opened it. His words were careful at first. Apologetic, but not fully formed. He talked about confusion, about things being difficult, about trying to understand what had happened. But as I read further, something shifted.
The tone changed.
It became more honest, less controlled. He admitted things. Not everything, but enough. He wrote about the distance that had grown between us, about how he hadn't noticed it happening until it was already too late. He mentioned Lena, not with the same certainty he used to have, but with hesitation. He didn't accuse her. He didn't fully defend her either. It was somewhere in between, and that space said more than any clear statement could. He asked if I was okay. That question again. But this time it felt different. Not because of how he asked it, but because of how I answered it in my own mind.
Yes.
I was. Not in the way he imagined. Not in the way I used to pretend. But in a way that didn't depend on him anymore. I folded the letter slowly and placed it on the table beside me. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel the need to respond immediately. I just felt calm. Because for the first time, his words didn't define anything for me. They didn't change my direction. They didn't reopen old wounds. They were simply information. Later that evening, I went for a walk. The air was cool, the sky fading into soft colors as the day ended. People passed by, living their lives, unaware of the story I had carried for so long. And I realized something then, something simple but powerful. I had spent years believing that my life was tied to one role, one identity, one relationship. But it wasn't. It never was. I had just never stepped outside of it long enough to see that.
Now I had.
And there was no going back. When I returned home, the apartment felt warmer somehow. Not because anything had changed physically, but because I had fully arrived, not just in a new place, but in a new understanding of myself. The letter was still on the table, unanswered. And for the first time, that felt completely right. The letter stayed on my table for 3 days before I touched it again. Not because I was avoiding it, but because I didn't feel rushed anymore. That was the difference. For most of my life, every emotional decision I made was urgent. Respond quickly, fix things immediately, don't let distance grow. Silence used to feel dangerous, like something that needed to be filled before it turned into loss. But now, silence felt stable. It gave me space to think, not react. On the third morning, I sat down with a fresh cup of coffee and read Daniel's letter again, slower this time. Without the initial layer of emotion, I could see more clearly what was actually there, not just the words, but what he struggled to say between them. Regret, yes. Confusion, definitely. But also something new. Awareness. Not complete, not fully formed, but present. And that mattered more than any apology he could have written perfectly. I didn't cry this time. I didn't feel the sharp ache I would have felt months ago. Instead, I felt something quieter. Understanding. Not the kind that excuses everything, but the kind that allows you to see people as they are, flawed, influenced, imperfect. Daniel wasn't a villain. He was someone who had slowly drifted into a life where it became easier to believe the version of reality that required the least resistance. And Lena, she hadn't changed. If anything, she had simply revealed herself more clearly over time. The difference was, I was no longer standing in a position where her behavior could shape my identity. I took out a piece of paper. For a moment, I just held the pen, not writing yet. Because this wasn't just a response. It was a boundary. And boundaries require clarity. Daniel, I began. I didn't write dear. Not out of coldness, but because I didn't need to soften what I was about to say. Thank you for your letter. I read it more than once, and I believe you were honest in ways you haven't been before. That matters. I paused, thinking carefully about the next part. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted every word to be true, not emotional. I need you to understand something clearly. I did not leave because of one moment, one argument, or one misunderstanding. I left because of a pattern, one that lasted long enough for me to realize that staying would mean losing myself completely. The words came easier after that. For many years, I built my life around being your mother. Not in a healthy way, but in a way that slowly erased everything else about me. That was my mistake. Not yours. But what happened later, the distance, the dismissal, the way my voice stopped mattering, that part was not something I imagined. I stopped again, letting the silence settle before continuing. I am not writing this to make you feel guilty. I am writing this so you understand that I see things clearly now. And I am not willing to return to a version of life where I am reduced to something convenient or manageable. I leaned back slightly, reading what I had written so far. There was no anger in it.
No accusation.
Just truth. If you want to have a relationship with me, it will have to be different. Not based on obligation, not based on history, and not based on the idea that I will always adjust to make things easier for you. That sentence mattered. More than anything else. I am not asking for anything from you. I am simply telling you where I stand. I signed my name, Amelia, not Mom. That, too, was intentional. When I finished, I didn't feel relief the way people often describe after expressing something difficult. I felt aligned, like my actions finally matched my understanding. I folded the letter and set it aside. I would send it later. That same afternoon, I met Rebecca and a few others from the walking group at a small cafe near the park. It had become a quiet routine, nothing formal, nothing planned too far in advance. Just people choosing to spend time together because they enjoyed it. No expectations beyond that. Rebecca smiled when she saw me. "You look different," she said. "Different how?" I asked. "Lighter," she replied, but not in a fragile way. In a settled way. I considered that. She wasn't wrong. We sat outside, the conversation moving easily from one topic to another. Books, travel, small stories about everyday things. At some point, I realized I was laughing, not politely, not out of habit, but genuinely. It caught me off guard for a second. Not because I couldn't laugh before, but because it used to feel like something I gave to others. Now it felt like something that belonged to me. Later, as we walked through the park, I slowed down for a moment, letting the others move ahead slightly. The air was cool, the trees shifting softly in the wind, and everything felt present. Not rushed, not weighed down by anything behind or ahead. And that's when it fully settled. This wasn't a temporary phase. This wasn't recovery. This was my life now. Not defined by what I had endured, not defined by what I had lost, but defined by what I had chosen. That evening, I returned home and finally sent the letter.
No hesitation. No second-guessing.
Just a quiet, final decision. After that, I didn't check my phone constantly. I didn't wait for a reply. If it came, it came. If it didn't, that was also an answer. Days passed, then a week. When his response finally arrived, I didn't open it immediately. I placed it on the table just like I had done before and continued with my day. Because whatever was inside it, apology, explanation, emotion, it no longer had the power to shift my direction. That power was mine now. That night, I sat by the window, a cup of tea in my hands, watching the city lights settle into their quiet rhythm. There was a calmness in me that I had never experienced before. Not the absence of problems, not perfection, but something deeper.
Self-respect.
For years, I thought love meant endurance, sacrifice, silence. Now I understood something different. Love, real love, even for your own child, cannot exist where you disappear. And I had disappeared for too long, but not anymore. Now, I was here.
Fully. Clearly.
And for the first time in my life, that was enough.